Hi everyone, thanks for joining this BIM4Legal webinar, which is about 4D exchange information requirements. We are one short today. James Bowles is unfortunately unwell due to his second vaccine, but there's the three of us. Just going to bit of housekeeping. Everyone's on mute, and this is being recorded. You will be able to get the recording from the UK BIM Alliance YouTube page in due course. If you have any questions, please put them in the questions box and we will deal with them at the end. So just to introduce all of us, my name's May Winfield. I am the Head of Commercial and Legal for Cities and Digital at Borough Happold. I'm a specialist in BIM and construction technology and one of the co-authors of the 4D EIR template. And Peter, did you want to go next to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi everybody, my name is Peter. I'm calling from Brisbane tonight in Australia. I'm a chartered quantity surveyor as my background. I've spent a fair bit of time doing 4D planning. I'm also one of the co-authors of the 4D EIR, and I'm looking forward to having a chat to you tonight. DJ, you want to go next, mate?
Cheers, guys. So hi everyone, my name's David John Gibbs, or everyone calls me DJ. I'm based out in Hong Kong, working for a contractor called Gammon Construction. So you've got a real world view of 4D modelling with the three of us. I started my 4D journey back in 2011 and was mainly looking at it from a delay analysis perspective. Quite fortunate now I oversee the 4D developments at Gammon on all of our projects, so I can offer a bit of a contractor's perspective on 4D.
Great. Just very quickly to say that for those who don't know, BIM4Legal is a neutral group where we try and enable people to gain knowledge and share information and knowledge about the legal and contractual side of BIM, hence the discussion today. The 4D construction group, and there'll be a link at the end, is an international group. It's completely open membership where we talk and deal with all matters about 4D. And I'm sure DJ and Peter will tell you more about the group in due course. DJ, Peter, did you want to get started?
Sure, I'll make a start. Cheers, May. So first things first, as a group, we always get asked, well, what is a 4D model? Let me just come across this one. Now, this is obviously going to be the topic of today. And what we're going to run through is really, before we talk about how you ask for 4D, we're going to share what it is, what the possibilities are with it, what some of the interpretations can be and the difference in how you ask for it, and then go into the details of the document that we've actually started to draft and is available for your use and for review. So first things first, well, what is a 4D model? And as I mentioned, having followed 4D since 2011, I was quite fortunate. I did a doctorate looking at BIM and delay or disputes, and particularly looking at delay disputes. And I got to read lots of different literature, academic and industry literature about 4D modelling, and follow those developments over time. And there is a real lack of consistent definition with what 4D modelling is. For me, ultimately, it comes down to a virtual construction simulation. It's a tool in which we plan our projects better. And by that, I mean we link 3D geometry to time-related information to produce that virtual construction sequence. So on the slide now, you can see what many of you will understand to be a 4D model. We can see how the construction is progressing over time. We've got different elements of temporary works, plant equipment within that model to help understand what a construction project will look like at specific points in time. Now, the difference with this compared to, say, traditional BIM is a lot of us understand BIM as the final built asset. It's what it will look like in its completed state, really gearing that information up for the operation and maintenance stage. But from a graphical point of view, what does that information look like at given points in time? So on the left-hand side here in the video, we can see a Gantt chart, often used to plan or manage time on construction projects. And on the right-hand side, we can see the geometry. So at different points in time, we've got the data date here. And when it hits that point, we can see how construction will actually look. So it's very, very good for the capital delivery phase of a construction project. Now, it comes in lots of different shapes and sizes, and we'll explain a little bit about what they are and why some of the misinterpretation. But from the group's perspective, we see it beyond just simply linking a 3D model to time data, but actually the incorporation of lots of different pieces of information required to deliver that project. So we might have safety sketches, we might have logistics plans, we might have temporary works designs, plant and equipment specifications and manuals. We can even go as far to put in photographs of site conditions, particularly if you're looking retrospectively or reporting. Now, what this means is it really fits in with the overall philosophy of BIM. We're looking at generating information, coordinating it and centralizing it in one place so people can make better decisions. Now, the idea is that no additional or limited amount of additional information is created. The information we centralize and coordinate is information that you should be expected to deliver your project already. You should know the sequence of works. You should know what the temporary conditions should look like. You should have undertaken method statements. This is a way of pulling it all together so everybody's on the same page. Now, without that, project teams will sit in meetings like I have and many of you have with multiple different pieces. So bits of paper, flip charts, and in our heads, we have to coordinate all of these different bits together. So we'll have the design, which might be in CAD, 2D CAD. It could be in a 3D model. We'll have the Gantt chart, again, sitting very separate. And Gantt charts aren't always the easiest pieces of information to read, particularly for those that don't create them or use them all the time. So the ability to combine just those two pieces of information, but then supplement it with others, really helps with that communication and understanding on a project and helps us plan projects better. So the first benefit of why teams use them is for this level of communication. And what I love about this slide is it shows how all the different stakeholders on a project engage with a 4D model. This isn't just for management, this isn't just for tender purposes. This is engaging with the operations team, the site engineers, the BIM team, management, whoever is required to deliver that project can engage and get involved with a 4D model. Now, a lot of the pushback we hear is, well, we don't have enough information to create a 4D model. Now, for me, that's the exact reason why you produce a 4D model. You find your information gaps. If you can't build it virtually, how do you expect to build it physically? Now, it's not one stage deliverable. It's something that iterates over time. So these workshops or meetings that you can see on the screen aren't one-offs. They're meetings that should happen regularly to help plan that project going forward. Now, as well as improving collaboration and that information integrity or integration, the teams also use them for as I mentioned, planning their projects. So here we've got examples of logistics and markups of 4D models to help feedback into that communication loop between the different teams. Now, I should just say, I cannot take any credit for the detail and the brilliance of the 4D models that you're seeing on the screen. These belong to James Bowles, who unfortunately was meant to present today, but isn't too well. And this shows some of the great work and really the value-driven models that can be created. So here we can see all temporary works design. We've got traffic management, we've got plant and equipment, we've got turning circles for our plant and equipment as well to look at safety. We've got directional arrows for transport, exclusion zones. It really is great. And the medium in which it's communicated, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is important for the teams to engage. So how do people communicate the challenges that they've got on the construction project? How do they assist with problem solving and making sure that everybody is clear as to what should happen on the project, making clear what should happen on the project in advance through these virtual meets. And particularly from my focus of 4D is looking at 4D modeling for safety. So this is an example of one of our projects actually, which we work closely with Freeform to help train our team up. And the idea is that in some of the other models, you might see general overviews of master plans, which is great, overall logistics plans, which is brilliant. But we took a real deep dive at 4D and looked at safety on high risk and repetitive tasks. So here we've got steel beams that are being installed. We had to install many of them in a relatively confined space. It needed to follow a certain sequence, but it also needed to, well, our primary objective was to look at the safety of the workforce. So we went to the extent of modeling the spider crane that you can see there. We modeled the mutes and we positioned our operatives to make sure that we knew exactly how many people should be involved, where they should be standing, and to then refine that process to make sure that it was as safe as possible. So while we were looking at safety for this, it actually unearthed a lot of other benefits as well. So the 4D safety reviews were brilliant, but it actually brought up conversations like, oh, have we procured that spider crane? When's it going to arrive on site? What other installs have we got on at the moment? Will we be obstructed by other MEP? When are our modules for E&M arriving and where will they be stored? Now, I ran a workshop for 4D on this, and in 1 hour, over 100 questions were asked. So going back to our earlier slide with all the different members of the team, we had planners, logistics managers, safety officers, BIM team, engineers, myself, all in the meeting. Now, 100 questions were raised from that discussion, from coordinating all these different pieces of information. Now, if that meeting didn't take place, or if we were using traditional siloed pieces of information, how many questions would we realistically think that were going to get brought up? And how many would be answered or communicated in front of the team? And I don't know the exact answer, but I can tell you for sure it would not be as many as in that one workshop. And that provided clarity for the whole team, especially important for safety on site. We also use them for reporting and for helping with progress monitoring. So here's an example of, on the left, a 4D model with obviously the skyline around it as well. And on the right, we have time-lapse photography. So we can monitor and compare photography of the real world against what was planned to be installed. So we can use that for reporting, but we can also use that for proactive control. Now, many of us will be working on sites where there is time-lapse photography or there are regular photographs. And this can be easily integrated with the 4D environment to help improve that understanding, streamline the reporting, or streamline the communication of reporting on the site. And then finally, and these are only a selection of the uses, so please don't think it's everything for 4D, but many of the items I've spoken about are about proactive project control, which is brilliant. And for me, 4D is best used for planning, not just for reporting. But when I first started looking at 4D, it was predominantly looked at delay analysis, and more often than not, retrospectively, projects that had overrun on time. How could we understand the challenges that they faced and communicate them to a wider audience? So this is an example of 4D modeling used for delay analysis. We can see on the far left, there's the contract program over here. Then, based on changes in agreement, there was the revised target program. And then on the far right, you've got your actual site recorded situation. So what the final impact was on that site. Now, I did lots of research into this, and what I love about this tool is, or the way that this was presented, is that it links to real life photographs. And in the top right, I'm not sure if you can see it properly, we also have 3D detailed setups of some of the big issues, so the scaffolding, layout and access on this job. Now, the reason why this is great is a lot of people don't trust that 3D or 4D model. They don't quite think that it's going to resemble the reality. And by linking this information, it really pushed the burden onto the other side to say, well, actually, no, that isn't true. And that isn't a true reflection. Now, this example for delay analysis was extremely successful. The claiming party got the majority of their award. And the reason being, it was very difficult for the other side to prove otherwise. Now, that isn't all down to the 4D model itself. The video or the model or the images were part of the story. But what made it great, again, was that collaboration. So the building up of the narrative for delay purposes, talking to the site team, engaging with the site team. It's so challenging to go out to people and say, I know this project finished a year ago, but can you remind me what happened? Looking at a Gantt chart, people just don't want to get involved. But putting a 4D model up, talking with your team, can really strengthen that narrative and open up lots of discussions. So when I was in claims consultancy, we'd spend a long time going through emails, but before you know it, you've had a quick chat with the project manager or a foreman and said, why couldn't you get access on this day? And I'll turn around and be like, oh, I was receiving WhatsApps from the, I don't know, the concrete truck driver or whatever, or there was a traffic accident. And that's access to information that you wouldn't normally have visibility to. And it can help unlock those discussions and, yeah, as I've mentioned, really strengthen your position. So we have lots of different opportunities. We can use it for planning. We can use it for project management. We can use it for reporting purposes or even tenders, but I'm not touching on that really today. And then also for retrospective analysis. So the investment has a place in all different stages of the project life cycle. And while there are lots of different benefits, we're going to talk about why it's so important to be clear in terms of how you ask for this information. So I'll hand over to Peter now to share a little bit from his perspective.
Thanks, DJ. Yes, and I guess getting more into the topic of the EIR and why it's so important is when starting to work on these 4D projects, we were sometimes asked for, can you give me 4D? And some of the results were terrible, and it wasn't 4D's fault or the technology's fault. It was because the effort that was put into 4D wasn't solving the problem that the client needed. So to show that point, we're just going to show two examples of how 4D can be applied very differently for very different use cases. So DJ, if you can jump over to the next slide. and you can talk to it with me because you're the safety-based expert.
Doing my best. Hang on, let me just get over to here. Right.
So this is an example, and this is probably a use case for an owner or a contractor, but this is where we're doing detailed safety planning. And this is similar to that example that DJ showed earlier, where his company were doing the detailed planning with the spider crane. But in this case, the team is raising a risk. They're looking at the model at a point in time. You know, they're highlighting what needs to be done, who it needs to be worked with to, and really capturing the information at a very detailed level using 4D planning techniques. Do you want to add to that, DJ?
Yeah, so what I really like about, so this is a solution called 3D Repo, and they have a module inside it called Safety Base. Now, when we produce our 4D models, they're great for those that can engage or feel comfortable navigating a 4D model, whatever that might be. So in Synchro, Fusel. Now, more often than not, they get communicated as a video or maybe as still images, like a flipbook in a PowerPoint. And we'll send that to the team, particularly when we're using such a high level of detail to mark up and to comment. And what we'll get back is an array of different comments, like you're seeing on the screen, which is brilliant. You know, we've done what we first wanted to achieve. We've got that level of engagement. But what we don't have is a central area for capturing all these risks. So how can we do that without, you know, and how can we do that spatially? So it might be an Excel spreadsheet traditionally that people will, you know, maybe write down the timestamp of a video and say, you know, relocate tower crane here and put some images, or it may be a PowerPoint where they, you know, put a bit of a scratch up, but all of a sudden you've got 10 different PowerPoints from 10 different people and you're trying to incorporate all of this. And it's not spatially located. It's still, you know, it's kind of taking it from 4D into flat images and really, well, we lose a lot of benefits of the process. What's brilliant in this platform, and I'll just run it again, is that everybody can engage with the model. So it's web-based, so you don't need any specific software. You just log in. And I'm not a 3D Repo salesman, sorry. It's just that I do think it's a very good platform. And then you can tag your risk. So it sits in a database, and that's there for history. You know, like that's part of your audit trail. So you can say, you can see who's reviewed it, when they reviewed it. You can assign responsibilities to people. You can mark up like you would in Paint, very simply. And it doesn't need to be too pretty. Then what you can do is make the changes in your 3D environment, bring them into your 4D environment, update your program, and upload them to, again, the 3D Repo. And you can understand change over time. So you can see what was actioned, you can see what was changed, you can see the impact of that change. Now, originally, this would just take still images like at specific points in time, but now it links directly to Synchro. So we can run the time bar and you can keep pushing in your issues over time for that particular aspect of work. So whether that, well, depending on what your 4D model is, whether it's the whole site or just, you know, I guess a technical review on a specific work activity like we've got here.
That's awesome, DJ. Thanks for that. And I think we can see that the use case is very powerful, and we can see how a owner or a contractor can get value from this. But we obviously understand that you won't get this unless you ask for the specific use case. As we saw with the example before, there are many different ways to implement 4D. So you know, DJ really explained that well on how we can get a lot of value from tracking our risks and proactively managing our risks through a 4D environment. So the next use case that we're going to show is quite a different use case. So this is an example of a major infrastructure project where the owner's got to manage thousands of approvals and understand the impact of those approvals on the overall schedule. So we can see this is a very different problem that needs to be solved. But by utilizing the 3D models, the GIS information, and the power of 4D planning with a rule-based engine, the potential impacts of schedule changes can be analyzed quite quickly. It's a rail alignment on the left, and each block that you see represents a different property. And in this case, the schedule was developed. But what the owner has done is the owner's got an approvals database on how they need to acquire each property that the asset needs to be built on. And in this case, the approval strategy has changed. So we re-imported the approvals database into our 4D model and reran the schedule, which is derived from the approvals plan and the rule-based engine. And in a matter of very short amount of time, the owner can understand what a different approval strategy will have on their overall program by using the spatial planning elements linked to the 4D model. The point, and we can go to the next slide, DJ. So what we're trying to say is that 4D planning is really a planning discipline. The use cases are endless and they vary hugely depending on the client's needs. And therefore, it's very important for the consumer of 4D, who we generally refer to as the appointing party, to specify exactly what outcomes they need. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of wasted effort on doing work that is not really required or bringing any value to the project. We can go to the next slide, mate. So this is why we believe an EIR is very important, and that it's very important that we don't get asked to just do 4D, because it doesn't tell us that much. We need to understand why we want to do 4D, what we want to do, who needs to do it, when it needs to be done, and how much of it needs to be done in order to deliver that value. I'll hand over to May now, I believe, to jump and talk about the EIR in a bit more detail.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Peter said, and as you've heard, EIR is very important. And as those of you involved in BIM, where you say do BIM, or in this case do 4D, there's no special meaning to it. There's no magic to the phrase. What you think it means and what your client or the other side think it means is going to be wildly different. And as you've heard, 4D has so many different applications. There's so many different possibilities. What can be achieved, when and how. And so the purpose of an EIR becomes vital to make sure the client gets what they're expecting, but also you know what you are meant to provide, and you don't get to halfway down the project and the client says, well, that's not actually what I expected. I expected it to be different, or I was told I would be, it would serve a different purpose. Fundamentally, when we were preparing the EIR, we looked at how to flesh out what the client or the appointing party wants, why they want it, when they want it, what are the processes, what sort of systems do they have that certain things need to fit into. All of this intended to deliver them the true value that they have in mind. Fundamentally, 4D needs to meet the project objectives that the appointing party intends, that the project team intend. These will obviously be set by the appointing party at the beginning. And certainly the ISO 19650 has a lot of processes with the intention of the client or the appointing party thinking right at the start, what is it you actually want? But without a ready-made template, 4D is still quite new. And we have been told on various occasions, whilst people want to implement 4D, they don't know where to start. They don't know how to ask for what they're looking for, or they don't know how to advise the appointing party to prepare certain requirements. Next slide, DJ. So just a bit about the structure of the template. So first, you'll find it's divided into certain sections. It's intended to be easily readable by those who aren't familiar with 4D, by your legal advisors, by the appointing party, by all the lead appointed party, the appointed parties. So first one is about what does the client or the appointing party need to provide? How do they ask for what they want? Going back to moving beyond, we just want some 4D. So things like, what do they need to provide? So they need to provide access to the software or the cloud platforms that they want to be used. Do they need to provide access to relevant models and data to enable the 4D process to take place? And then going to why do they want 4D? What are the intended benefits and the outcomes they want? And this is important to ensure those can be brought to life via the relevant processes of 4D. If they don't say why they want something, if they just say, we want this to take place, their understanding of the benefit that that may result in may actually not be quite correct. There's also what 4D do they want? There's many uses of 4D. What are the scope of the uses they want? What do they want to use it for fundamentally at the end? And then how? So when and how should the 4D models be published? Who should be reviewing them and how often? Should the contractors 4D capability be assessed? Again, what are the criteria for that? And how should that take place? And how often? And as regards receipt of 4D models from various other parties, again, how should that take place? When should it take place? To put it very simply, it goes back to the who's doing what, when, and how. And the appointed party ideally needs to say in broad terms the fundamental parts of that they want, that will make their life easier, that fit into their processes and their systems. And then the project team can work to that in a very similar way to a BIM project. You have your EIR and your BET. You have the EIR being what does the appointed party want? And then this enables the project team to work towards that. Next slide, please, DJ. I think this is your turn.
So I guess working as a contractor, I can offer a bit of a contractor's perspective on the need for the EIR and where it's beneficial. And you know, more often than not, we, as May mentioned, we get it'll be in a part of the BIM requirements. There'll be a slide that says do 4D, and there'll be little more around than that. And what we try to do is look at it. Well, what's the value for us as the contractor? Where can we see all of that value in terms of how we're going to plan, report, and communicate our message? But what we try to do is put a bit of structure around what information the supply chain, the contractor or consultant, can actually deliver or what could be expected of them as deliverables. And firstly, we start with the key requirements. And the main part here is trying to emphasize that 4D isn't a standalone activity. It's not something additional that you bolt on and it costs extra. This is integral with how you deliver other key documents or meet key milestones. So this is the integration of 4D with mirroring your program or your program updates or milestones. It may be aligned with your BIM deliverables, so whether that's in your information delivery plan and so forth. It touches on the need for a 4D execution plan, which I'll talk about at the end. And it also lists a little bit about the software and the need for the software. So I can tell you for a fact how frustrating it is to try to align 4D software, even within a single project, let alone if you've got multiple packages on a mega project. So by way of example, we've worked with external consultants that have helped with training and or some 4D deliverables, and they might be using the same software, but a very different version or the latest version of that software. Now, not all of these software packages are backward compatible. So for us to open and review the models that we've paid for, we need to upgrade our software. Now, that can have a bit of a detrimental effect because then we need to upgrade all of the 4D deliverables that we've produced as well, and understanding what the consequences of that might be. Now, it's okay in your own environment when you are a contractor delivering just your package. But like I've said, if you're on a mega project and you ask for 4D and you're not clear with your requirements, the same as BIM, you will get lots of different responses. I've seen mega projects with multiple different suppliers that have used completely different software that cannot be stitched together. So if you're delivering a big highways project, rail project, building a city, and you want to understand your master program and stitch these 4D models together to understand what a macro view might look like, or understand the interfaces between different packages, very difficult if they're not in the same software. Very difficult to export, very different levels of detail, a really impossible task. So really on the key requirements, we outline what that needs to be in terms of both the deliverables, when they need to be delivered, how it's going to be done through your execution plan, and the tools that you're going to use to do that. Now, it's not prescriptive on software, but it does ensure that the software you use can at least be related to each other to meet the purposes. Point 2 here is on the actual model requirements. Now, for some of you that have seen the 4D models that we presented earlier, they will be very different to the 4D models that you may have seen elsewhere. There are so many different software versions, there are so many different levels of detail included, or levels of information included within them. Now, not all models include logistics, not all models will model plant and equipment. Some might just put boxes for scaffolding, for example. Others will model the entire tube. Now, what's important for you to make a decision or to problem solve on your project? Now, do I need that level of detail for everything? Do I need that level of detail for certain high risk and complex tasks? So within these modeling requirements, point 2, it really helps, or the aim is to help the person asking for the information consider their use case and consider what details they need. So it also looks at the dates for deliverables, as we mentioned before. It looks at who should have access to the 4D model and how should that relationship be managed. So is there a direct link with the P6 program if you're using P6 or the project program with the 4D model? Will they change in a live environment? It looks at how it's issued and what the outputs are. So how do you want to receive your 4D model? Do you want the 4D model itself? Like, would you like to be able to open it in the software and interrogate it yourself? Or are you happy to receive it as a video with set camera angles that are dictated by your supply chain? Do you want it as a PowerPoint with multiple images so you can go through and you can mark up? Do you want both? Do you want it included in your method statements to help with visual understanding? Now, there's lots and lots of different things to consider there, but it's really important that it's communicated, because otherwise, you will, particularly if you've got multiple suppliers, you won't get that level of consistency. In the third part, we talk about how the information is updated and how you measure the development on the project. Now, for me, this really comes down to planning versus reporting. Are you asking it to support your reporting, your monthly reports on progress, or your reports on key milestones, or to support payment applications? Or are you asking for it to ensure, or I guess, promote proactive planning between the project team? So how often are you expecting different team members to engage, to discuss? How often are you expecting information to be updated so it can reflect closer to the future reality? Now, very interesting and will vary on different projects. But if you don't set these requirements, again, there's no real definition of when you're going to get that information. And again, like I said, in what format. And then finally, we've got the presentation of these models. Now, we look at the process. So we call them 4D workshops. Really, we'd like them not to be called 4D workshops. We'd like them to be part of the project planning. So whether that's looking at safety, whether that's looking at sequencing, whether that's looking at logistics. The 4D model is there to support those functions and to support it proactively. So in this section, we talk about what it should be used for. Is it safety, logistics, planning? How can you rely on it? It goes into the technical again, so around the software, but also into the hardware. Now, I've produced 4D models, and I can tell you it's a lot easier if you've got 2 screens. Now, not everybody's given that luxury, but if you want to take 4D modeling properly, what hardware are you giving the team to do that? What software, what licenses are you making available to the project team? And who gets that? And what infrastructure do you have on site to communicate this? If you want the models or you want the videos and you want to use it for safety inductions, do you have TVs on site where you can play the videos? Do you have a big enough screen within your site office to share the models and to get enough team members around? Do you want a immersive cave or VR? There's so many different possibilities, and the use case will dictate what those medium of communication often are. And then finally, we've got the 4D execution plan. So how are you expecting your supply chain or consultant or contractor, I should say, to share how they're going to do this? Like, what format do you need? And by, in what kind of medium? Is it a separate 4D execution plan? Is it part of the BIM execution plan? A lot will determine how you set up your documentation on your project, but this needs to look at the roles and responsibilities. Who's going to own the 4D model? Who will be delivering it? Who will be championing it? And who are the ultimate users? Now, it's not just about the software, as we've mentioned before, and it's not just about the outputs, but also what training are you providing? And I'm not talking about the individual that will be doing the task. What training are you providing to the team? How are you opening their minds to see the possibilities of 4D construction for planning? Do they understand what information they can ask for? What's reasonable? What information is required to produce the detail? And do you have the resources to do that? And then finally, we look at the timeline again. When should this start? How frequent? And to what level of detail? So again, the communications back to the team. Now, without this, it's very difficult to hold people accountable, and it's very difficult to, or it's a very good way of encouraging the people to think proactively about how they're going to use these digital tools and how they're going to integrate them to plan the projects. So a lot of the projects that many of us will be working on have digital deliverables, and 4D really is a primary way of asking people to integrate them for that proactive planning. So I hand over back to May now, just to close out.
Thanks, DJ. Just a couple of points. One being, when you look at the template, you'll notice that it's as between the between the appointed party and the lead appointed party. We are amending it to make sure it also has clauses which are suitable as between the lead appointed party and appointed party, because the position may be different. And indeed, as one of the questions was raised, I noticed the 4D is often between the lead appointed party and appointed party, so that's coming soon. Next slide, please, DJ. So just a couple of points. The EIR template's available on our website. It's free to download. It's suitable for use now, but do let us have your feedback. It is a working document. We are in the process of doing a version 2, and so we welcome any feedback you have, positive or negative. If you use it, let us know which bits work and which bits don't, and there is our email address. Next slide. And you can find the EIR on our website, as well as on our website you'll find lots of other resources. We've done a series of podcasts. There's various other resources such as a maturity matrix. There's also a forum and a list of regular events we do. So I'm just gonna now go through some of the questions that have come in, and I'm going to ask my fellow speakers to turn on their cameras for this purpose. So first question to Peter, going to ask you. So can the client request for the information in IFC files, and what's your experience with that? And it was asked, I recently looked at the parameters contained in the schema and the literature about it is missing. What would be a good strategy?
Geez, it's a tough question. I think it's a great idea, especially for historical record keeping. If you could have your as-builts delivered in IFC with your schedule information in there, it would be absolutely fantastic. My experience with it is I have dabbled with it. I haven't seen it being done on a real project, so that's the first point. But I have dabbled with it, and I have seen schedule data being entered into an IFC schema through Grasshopper, and then exported in Rhino into a IFC format again with the schedule information in the schema. And then I've seen programs like Navisworks and Synchro read that IFC project natively, and you literally just press play and you can review your 4D model. And what's nice about that is because the IFC schema is open source and it's a step file that anybody can open, it means that in 20 years time, when some of these software programs don't exist anymore, you'll still be able to open your 4D model in IFC format. So it's a long answer. I think it's a great idea. I haven't seen it being done in practice, and the only way that these things can get done in practice is if we demand it from our software providers. So I think good concept, technically possible, not being used in practice much would be my short answer on that.
Thank you, Peter. DJ, one for you. There's so very insightful and important requirements for 4D in an EIR, but surely not all work areas on a project, especially infra projects, will benefit from 4D. Hence, should we also define where and when 4D requirements are needed rather than assuming it'll be used across a project? We have to be lean when adopting tech processes and defining LOD. What's your views?
Yeah, I'd agree to a point. So one of the examples that we showed, we really looked at focus areas. So that was a chiller plant room of a big like manufacturing center, and yeah, we looked at that in a high level of detail on its own. It depends what outputs or outcomes you're looking for. So if you want to help with the interface between different packages, then on a big infrastructure project, you probably will want to model it all. Maybe not to such a high level of detail, but to a level of detail that will allow you to do that. If you just want to look at safety at a specific situation, like I explained, then you can. As with all of this, yeah, you need to understand what your team is capable of, how much resource you're able to put in, what technologies you've got, the workflows between them and between other members of the team. So I think it needs to be value driven, as we try to emphasize. Know why you want to do it, and that will dictate how much detail you put in. I think it does have a place across a whole mega project, like a big infrastructure project personally, but again, only if there's the value use case there. If the project teams are going to use it, you know, it's not just a video or a gimmick. You know, it really needs to drive some level of value.
I think this goes back to the way the template is structured, which is why is the client asking for it and what do they want to achieve, rather than just using tech for tech's sake. And hopefully using something like the template, people have to think about that at the beginning, so it resolves this sort of concern that you're just doing it because someone said it was a good idea.
For sure.
Peter, there's a question about whether we could make the template available on plenary so that BIM teams can provide live feedback. What's your view, DJ and Peter?
I think we'll take feedback however we can. So from my perspective, yeah, more than happy to share it. If people are happy to host it, we're happy to share it.
Yeah.
One question that's been raised is, has training for end users who have not built to 4D been considered? So how do we upskill people who are very, very new to 4D?
Yeah, so I guess part of my role, so we work closely with James from Freeform, and his team ran workshops with our whole project team. So that was everybody from commercial, BIM team, logistics, engineers, and we showed them what was possible and how that information could be relied on. So yeah, we ran through some training, really tried to open up people's minds in terms of the art of the possible, and get them asking for, you know, what they needed to do their job that 4D could enhance. And it was quite surprising. We brought the supply chain in as well, so the subcontractors, and asked them their opinions on it. Yeah, really good exercise. Now, yeah, we're going through that at scale across our whole business, as with all the digital tools that are out there. But yeah, I think that awareness of what's possible and how you can rely on it, it is being, well, I can say firsthand that it's been done.
I could probably add to that as well. And I think when people talk about 4D training, a lot of people think, oh, we need to learn to drive the software tools. But I think we need to really move away from that. Not everybody needs to be able to build a 4D model. It's about how people use the 4D model. And sometimes for a manager, a Power BI report is an output from the 4D model that's enough for them to make the decisions they need to make. So I think that's a really important part of 4D, and we're probably to blame for it a bit as 4D practitioners, where we love getting involved in our tools and building our detailed 4D models and creating our beautiful animations. But I think the way that people consume 4D is changing, and it needs to change even more, and just give them the information that they need as consumers.
I think if there's any particular events that people think would be useful for upskilling on 4D, if you drop us a line on the 4D construction group, we can take that in mind when we're planning future events and get speakers in for webinars or hopefully in-person events at some stage. The last question is about something I sort of touched on earlier, which is how adaptable the current EIR template is to be used by the lead appointed party to the appointed parties, because the lead appointed party is ultimately responsible for defining requirements as he performed activity and produced the final outputs. And the EIR as currently drafted is probably more focused for the appointing party and the lead appointed party, but we are amending it so that it's suitable. There are variations where the situation is different down the chain, and would welcome your thoughts, everyone who's listening, on and how that relationship is different. Do you feel it needs additional clauses or additional positions to cater for what you actually do in practice? Because whilst we're all involved in the area, everyone's experience is different, and if you have encountered certain problems or issues which you think could be resolved if something was just clear in writing, we do want to hear from you. Those are all the questions. DJ, Peter, do you have any last words before we close up?
I think just one thing for me. I imagine on the call we've got a variety of different practitioners, whether it's from the legal community, whether it's from the BIM teams, whether they're planners or construction managers. And what we're trying to do is raise that awareness and make sure that 4D adds value for everyone and that we know how to ask for it. And in addition to the EIR, what we've tried to produce is a 4D maturity matrix to help people along their 4D journey. And that lists out a lot of the items that we'd probably expect to see or be covered in an execution plan. So not just looking at the level of detail and the software, but looking at training, looking at leadership, looking at when the model's used. And we pinned some examples to show different levels of maturity. So we'll be releasing that hopefully. Well, we did a first round on it and we're reviewing it, and we'll hopefully have another draft of that out later in the year. So if you're more heavily involved in 4D and you want to promote it and need a bit of a roadmap and not just ask for it, we're also creating that tool as well. And again, we'd value any feedback on that. So please get in touch with the group. And a big part of what we tried to do it's all in our spare time, is share and encourage the adoption of 4D, because we all see value in it, and we'll do our best to support people as much as we can.
One question that's just come through, which is I think worth discussing, is that rather than an EIR template, it should be a set of specifications or MVDs that can then be shared into the EIRs. From my perspective, I'd say the way the template's structured, you can use it as a set of specifications. It's not unlike a template, as in some of them where it's very much you just use it without any amendments. It's almost like a series of questions which you can fill in. So you can either, I think we've tried to make it as flexible as possible, so you can use it as a set of specifications and just take bits of it. Some of it may not be relevant to you, or use it as a template, allowing for the fact that the people compiling the documentation might not be very familiar with putting together an EIR at all. It may be their first time. But Peter, DJ, did you have any thoughts on that?
I just agree and echo that really. We're doing our best to kind of like produce like a bit of a structure for people to think about, and how that can be incorporated. I think it's maybe up to that end user, but if people see value in a different type of document, let us know. If you take a little bit of time to read it and you think that something extra would be would help supplement it, and we'll do our best to create it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, when we wrote the document, it wasn't necessarily just related to the overall EIR, because some of the projects that we work on don't follow an EIR. They're private companies in different sectors that follow their own structures and systems. So we're trying to cater for them as well. So it's hard to cater for everyone. So we have left it open and flexible for you to slice and dice it as you need it. But yeah, like we said, the more feedback we get, the more applicable we can make it. And like May was just saying, we got this feedback about it just being for the appointing party, and we're changing it. So we'd like to get more of that in the future. That's how we make it useful. So thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. And just left for me to say thank you to everyone for joining. Do get involved with both the BIM4Legal group as well as the 4D construction group and all the events that get held, and send us your comments. And thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Meg. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.